Hello. If you are watching this video, then we have succeeded at something. Several months ago, we made a video on the deep state, and YouTube wouldn't let us publish it because of the BBC. Ironically enough, the BBC was validating the entire point of our video by not letting us talk about some of their materials, even in a complimentary way. So, for the last several months, we have been fighting with the BBC over copyright stuff, making the case that this video is in fact fair use and actually promotes one of their projects from the 80s. So, I think it's an important topic. I hope you enjoy. Over the last few months of T-Rex Labs, we've noticed that YouTube is kind of not okay with us commenting on reality, but they are okay with us talking about movies. And so today we're going to be looking at entirely fictional representations of the deep state. Based on the title, you probably assume that we're going to be talking about those deep, shadowy organizations within the government that manipulate politics and reality through the application of force and surveillance, and of course, brainwashed assassins. Movies even show them infiltrating American cities with black helicopters and fancy alien spy technology.
So the government's been in bed with the entire telecommunications industry since the 40s. They've infected everything. They get into your bank statements, your computer files, your email.
I mean, they monitor everything, absolutely everything.
Elaborate on they. They? Well, there's lots of groups, actually, lots of initials. I mean,
back in the mid-1950s, the government started a little underfunded agency with the simple and laughable purpose of establishing contact with a race not of this planet.
The National Security Agency conducts worldwide surveillance, fax, phones, satellite communication.
hey, what branch of the government do we report to?
Well, none. They asked too many questions.
Who are you working for?
Johnny, that information is privileged and confidential. I'm a public servant.
We all assume deep, secret, shadowy influences in our government lurking in some of our agencies, and we assume corruption, graft, manipulation, and worse.
Years ago, I worked for the Central Intelligence Agency on the MK Ultra program. Are you familiar with it?
Manchurian candidate kind of stuff.
That's a vulgar generalization, but yes, you take an ordinary man and turn him into an assassin.
However, in this video, I want to introduce you to the most terrifying representative of the deep state ever to appear in any visual media. He is far scarier than any black bag wet work operative, and his department is far more destructive than any rogue spy agency. Far more sinister, far more insidious.
Minister, allow me to present Sir Humphrey Appleby, Permanent Under Secretary of State and head of the DAA.
Hello, Sir Humphrey.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you, Sir Humphrey.
You came up with all the questions I hoped nobody would ask.
Well, opposition's about asking awkward questions.
And government is about not answering them.
Well, you answer all mine anyway.
I'm glad you thought so, Minister. Good luck.
This is the main antagonist in the 1980s BBC comedy series Yes, Minister. The show follows a newly elected member of Parliament in the United Kingdom, and he's enough of a rising star that he gets placed on the cabinet, which allows him to oversee the Ministry of Administrative Affairs, which is not a real thing in the United States, but it's just as well because it's basically every bureaucratic agency in every country all over the world, emblematic of all of the useless, pointless, but also bigger than you would ever expect agencies and departments that you will find in every country.
How many people have we got in this department?
This department? Oh, well, very small.
Small. How small?
Oh, I don't know.
2,000? 3,000?
About 23,000, I think, Minister.
23,000? In the Department for Administrative Affairs? 23,000 people just administering other administrators? We'll have to do a time and motion study, see who we can get rid of.
We did one of those last year, Minister.
And?
It transpired we needed another 500 people.
And like any bloated bureaucracy, they are fiercely protective of their budgets and their staff and their personal importance. And the whole concept of the show is this constant battle between elected politicians who need to appeal to voters and the entrenched bureaucrats in the civil service who don't really need to do that at all. They can ignore the public and build their own empires. And the whole story of the show is this guy coming into conflict with a system. A fictional story, but in many ways very real. And it also shows a side that we rarely get to see, the system's view of the politician.
Pull up a chair, Bernard. And tell us what you think of our new minister.
Well, absolutely fine.
Yes. We'll have him house-trained in no time, as long as we can head him off this open government nonsense.
But what's wrong with open government? I mean, why shouldn't the public know more about what's going on?
Are you serious?
Well, yes, sir. I mean, it is the minister's policy, after all.
My dear boy, it's a contradiction in terms. You can be open, or you can have government.
But surely the citizens of a democracy have a right to know.
If people don't know what you're doing, they don't know what you're doing wrong.
It's very easy to think of the government as a single monolithic entity of corrupt politicians and their flunkies who just crush the poor regular citizens. But the reality is much more complicated. There are lots of different political ideologies and departments that are involved. The truly monolithic part of the nation state is this giant bureaucratic framework. It has very little to do with elected politicians. It has very little respect for them, and it just actually lumps them in with those dirty common people.
Ministers come and ministers go. The average minister lasts less than 11 months in any department. You see, Bernard, it is our duty to assist the minister to fight for the department's money despite his own panic reaction.
But even so, they are the people's representatives, democratically chosen.
MPs aren't chosen by the people, they're chosen by their local party. They've had no selection, no training. We have to do the job for them.
Now, you might assume that this show is talking about a uniquely British phenomenon, some leftover aristocratic class thing. And some of that does come out as you watch the show, and there's a lot of snobbery about British universities that I forget. But you do have these two factions right here in the United States as well. Let's just look at the numbers. In the United States, we have 500 elected federal politicians. That's House, Senate, President, etc., and we're going to be voting for some of those this week. And then at the state level, there's about 18,000. That's your state legislators, your governors, and more. And then at the local level, there's about 500,000. This is county commissioners, this is town council, school board, sheriff, coroners, all the way down to dog catchers. So if you add it up, that's not very many elected officials out of 330 million people, according to recent census projections of the United States. But there are 24 million US government employees, again, at the federal, state, and local level. That's 24 million US government employees compared to the roughly just over 500,000 elected officials means that our politicians are outnumbered nearly 50-1 by direct employees of the government. And actually, it's kind of worse than that, because another very important thing that we never really talk about here in the States, but the show demonstrates, is how quangos work. We should talk about that. There's far more people who work for the federal bureaucracy indirectly, but at complete taxpayer expense.
There are still around 8,000 paid appointments within the gift of ministers to quasi-autonomous non-government organisations at a cost to the taxpayer of £5 million a year. You must have 2 or 3 spare.
Well, there's certainly a lot of them around.
Non-government organizations are a very powerful force in our nation, but many of them are only quasi-non-government organizations because they get their directors from government departments, they get all their money from government grants, they end up working very hand in glove with governments. And obviously there's also privately traded companies that work solely for the US government and have boards made up of retiring bureaucrats generally. So all in all, we have way more than 24 million people working for the administrative state in this country. Some of those grants come from elected officials, but most of the dollars go straight through the bureaucrats themselves, which makes their agencies and their departments even more powerful than they first appear. And bureaucrats usually have seniority and a home court advantage and the gigantic labyrinth of systems that they have built to protect themselves and the power of their departments.
I thought these planning inspectors were supposed to be impartial.
Oh, really, Minister? So they are. Railway trains are impartial too. But if you lay down the lines for them, that's the way they go.
That's not fair.
It's politics, Minister.
So how did all of these systems get built? The show doesn't go into the history of bureaucracy, but all the systems that preserve and grow it are on display. These men that protect the system are permanent secretaries. That's their title, but there's also this expectation that they can't be removed from this position. No accountability. It's another reason that departments in government need to be so big. The guilt for mistakes can be diffused over thousands and thousands of people.
You're in no danger of the sack. In industry, if you screw things up, you get the boot. In the civil service, if you screw things up, I get the boot.
Very droll, Minister. Now, if you've approved the list...
No, Humphrey. I am not going to approve any honour for any civil servant in this department who hasn't earned it.
What do you mean, earned it?
I mean, earned it. Done something to deserve it.
But that's unheard of.
Earlier this year, the Biden administration actually changed the rules for the OPM, that's the Office of Personnel Management, to make it even harder for the government employees to be removed. It's now almost impossible to do it if they don't commit any really specifically egregious felonies. And if you have a cushy job that now has basically no performance requirements, that leads to a sense of entitlement.
Did you know that 20% of all honours go to civil servants?
A fitting tribute to their devotion to duty, Minister.
No, their duty is what they get paid for. The rest of the population has to do something extra to get an honour, something special.
Minister, Her Majesty's civil servants spend their lives working for a modest wage. And at the end, they retire into obscurity.
A modest wage, did you say?
Alas, yes.
Humphrey, you get over 30,000 a year. That's 7,000 more than I get. And you do not retire into obscurity. You take a massive index-linked pension and go off to become directors of oil companies and banks.
Ah, yes, but very obscure directors, Minister.
This show does a fantastic job of showing how the environment and the rewards of the civil service will attract certain kinds of people, and the way that perverse incentives create this sort of administrative leviathan. And every episode in the 3, 4, 5 seasons is about a different aspect of politics, or a different type of administrative red tape, or a different ministry that has a specific responsibility. A few of the episodes are a little bit dated, like the one about how the Soviets have infiltrated the Foreign Office. Obviously never have to worry about that again. But, you know, a show about bureaucracy is going to end up being pretty timeless.
Then we follow the 4-stage strategy.
What's that?
A standard Foreign Office response in a time of crisis. In stage 1, we say nothing is going to happen.
Stage 2, we say something may be going to happen, but we should do nothing about it.
In stage 3, we say that maybe we should do something about it, but there's nothing we can do.
Stage 4, we say maybe there was something we could have done, but it's too late now.
I think that is the White House position on the border right now, or maybe that'll be their position next week. There's a million clips that we could play from this show, but because school choice is a pretty hot topic this year, and it's going to be an even hotter topic next year, let us see how Sir Humphrey reacted to this idea almost 40 years ago.
I'm going to let parents take their children away from school and move them to any school they want.
Oh, you mean after application, scrutiny, tribunal hearing, and appeals procedures?
No, Humphrey, just move them whenever they want to.
I'm sorry, I don't quite follow.
This government is going to let parents decide which schools to send their children to.
Prime Minister, you can't be serious. But it's preposterous.
Why?
Well, you can't expect parents to make these choices. I mean, how on earth would parents know which schools are best? Parents have no qualifications to make these choices. I mean, teachers are the professionals. Parents are the worst people to bring up children. They have no qualifications qualifications, no training. You don't expect untrained teachers to teach. The same should apply to parents.
People choose their family doctor without having medical qualifications.
As a matter of fact, I think letting people choose doctors is a very bad idea. Very messy. Much tighter to allocate people to GPs. Much fairer. Then we can even out the numbers and everyone has an equal chance of getting the bad doctors.
Now, all of these arguments have happened before, and they will continue to happen. And at some level, arguing about the external statistics and the outcomes and the symptoms and the wasted money and how to vote in new candidates is kind of pointless. It is important to know that stuff, but it doesn't do anything about the root issues. You really have to be willing to dismantle systems that have been built up to protect government workers at all cost, not just tweak a few test results here and there. Now, fortunately this year, people are talking about some root issues. And the powers that be are just as resistant to this idea as they always have been. Remember that of those 24 million direct government employees, almost 12 million of them are involved in public school education. Now, that's not 12 million teachers. We have less than 4 million teachers in this country. The other 8 million don't educate, they administrate. They apply the policies of the Department of Education, and that is where most of the waste is.
But you have to stop the liquidation of the Department of Education, Humphrey.
I wonder whether we oughtn't to play along with it, in the interests of the nation's children.
Never mind the nation's children. What about our colleagues at the Department of Education?
Yes, of course. Sorry.
Humphrey, let's be clear about this. The only people who will like this idea are the parents and the children. Everyone who counts will be against it.
What's our argument?
Well, obviously, that this new proposal will destroy our educational system.
Well, everybody knows it's destroyed already.
Well, we will say... Sorry, the press will say that it's government interference in the Department of Education that destroyed it, and that this new plan will make things even worse.
Will that do the trick?
It always has in the past.
And it might do the trick now. The powers that be are just as resistant to it as they always have been, and that means they're going to run the same plays that they always have. Downsizing is absolutely unacceptable unless there is a way to, add staff and more layers of impenetrable bureaucracy in the name of efficiency.
Once they start abolishing whole departments, the very foundations of civilization crumble.
Barbarians at the gates.
The return of the Dark Ages. We let them amalgamate departments, but that worked very well.
Yes, quite. You keep the existing staff and you put in an extra layer of coordinating management at the top.
Exactly.
Now, you might be asking, how did the creators of this show get away with making this kind of material, especially on the BBC, that is government-controlled television in the UK? And the reason is that the show aired during Margaret Thatcher's administration, and so those BBC executives assumed that it lampooned her specific people and her more conservative policies. So they gave it a budget, which was relatively small, they put it on BBC Two, and were a bit surprised to see that it exploded in popularity. BBC officials took the credit, of course, not realizing that it was satirizing the timeless and eternal bureaucracy which predated Thatcher and outlived her, and that they themselves were a part of. And after its success, left-leaning media outlets praised it because media commentators and entertainment reviewers have some of the shallowest understandings of these things. So it went on to have several seasons, and it has been copied many times. And I think it's important to compare Yes Minister with some of its copycats, because if you do that, then you will see that there's something very special, something extremely unique about Yes Minister. One of the direct descendants is The Thick of It, which is also set in the British bureaucracy, also produced by the BBC, but this time it's a mockumentary style. It's all handheld. Basically, it's The Office. Like, imagine if there were a hypothetical British version of The Office.
The thing is, a lot of the calls you've made today, they've been off, wrong, not the right calls. Okay, I'll give you some examples, because I can see that's tough. Okay, first one, you didn't even send that email. It was still in drafts, okay?
And that same showrunner even made an American version of this in the Vice President's office for HBO. Very reliant on that same style of cringe humor, where you're not really sure if it's funny.
Is that even a joke?
Yeah, it's a wordplay or a parody. Okay, doesn't matter. Got another one.
All right. Ladders, obviously germane to the firefighting business. You go, firefighters are always climbing ladders, and in politics, you're always in this, I don't even know what I wrote, but it's basically you're taking steps to get somewhere, but without a ladder.
Yeah, this is not making me laugh at all.
We'll bring that one back when it's ready.
I mean, these shows can be kind of funny, despite the clips that I've shown you, but they're not very good satire because they rely too heavily on the characters being incompetent or malicious. Now, obviously, government is both incompetent and malicious at levels that are just almost impossible to comprehend. But when your comedy characters take this to such cartoonish levels, you're not really exposing the bureaucracy itself. The viewer doesn't really learn anything about how the system works. The main character in the thick of it is malicious and vicious, and he's so destructive to himself and to others that there can't really be clear commentary on the actual institutional system that he is a part of. And I can't even show you any clips of him that aren't just profane, insult-ridden tirades. They actually brought in a profanity consultant to punch up the dialogue, which is impressive considering that the showrunner is himself an Italian Scotsman. Sir Humphrey, on the other hand, has no vitriol in him. He's outraged occasionally, but he's usually affable, calm, urbane. He's motivated by the cause of big government and largely impartial. He even takes pride in being a moral vacuum, in being above the petty desires of the voters and only thinking of the nation as a whole. The nation as defined by the government as defined by the administration of policy by bureaucrats.
And you don't care?
It's not my job to care. That's what politicians are for. My job is to carry out government policy.
Even if you think it's wrong?
Well, almost all government policy is wrong, but frightfully well carried out.
Humphrey, have you ever known a civil servant to resign on a matter of principle?
I should think not. What an appalling suggestion.
It's way too easy to make a show where everyone is a backstabbing traitor or a secret assassin brainwasher, and that is why the deep state is bad. It's far more difficult to have nice, likable characters reveal the insidious nature of the scream. Lesser screenwriters would have given Sir Humphrey a deep, dark, vile secret behind the smile to make him really obviously bad, or, if we're an American show, a southern accent.
Power is a lot like real estate. It's all about location, location, location. The closer you are to the source, the higher your property value.
But in this show, when his most shameful secret is finally discovered, it's just that he made a mistake as a young clerk and lost 40 million pounds. But by the time that mistake comes to light, that 40 million pounds is just a drop in the bucket of what his ministry has wasted, so everyone just shrugs it off. A minor lapse in judgment that means nothing in the grand scheme of things, nothing compared to the dignity and purpose of building a bigger and more majestic government.
We want all responsibilities, Minister, as long as they mean extra staff and bigger budgets. It is the breadth of our responsibilities that makes us important. Makes you important, Minister. When you see vast buildings, huge staff, and massive budgets, what do you conclude?
Bureaucracy?
No, Minister. You conclude that at the summit there are men of great stature and dignity who hold the world in their hands and tread the earth like princes.
Prince of the Earth. That reminds me of the Screwtape Letters, a great British book written by C.S. Lewis about a middle management demon educating his nephew in the fine art of corrupting human beings. Way scarier than some kind of Tim Curry in Latex Devil because it is so subtle and so comfortable. Sir Humphrey Appleby is that kind of middle management bureaucrat. He is so secure in his own empire, and it's so cozy and nice and familiar, so cloying in its attractiveness, so disarming, and so corrupt that it is truly chilling. It's obvious that he was a good man once, but the system has bent him. And now he is bending everyone around him to the same purpose.
For the first time, I fully understand that you are purely committed to means and not to ends.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, Minister, and all of my colleagues, there is no difference between means and ends.
If you believe that, Humphrey, you will go to hell.
Bureaucracy in this show is basically a character all of its own, a force of nature, the fallen nature of man. The politician, Jim Hacker, to his credit, tries to resist the corrupting nature of the system, and he starts to learn a few of the tricks, and he sees through some of the tactics that are being used against him eventually.
You might create a dangerous precedent.
You mean that if we do the right thing this time, we might have to do the right thing again next time? On that philosophy, nothing would ever get done at all.
On the contrary, many, many things must be done, but
nothing must be done for the first time.
What I mean is that I am fully seized of your aims, and of course I will do my utmost to see that they're put into practice.
You mean no?
I mean, as far as one can see, in the fullness of time, looking at it by and large...
No, Humphrey.
But, spoiler alert, his victories are pretty few and far between. Eventually, he is so enmeshed in this system, and his career is so tied to the success of the ministry, he becomes fully house-trained. He can't fight the inertia of Whitehall, he's constantly outmaneuvered, he's constantly misled, and he is constantly tempted. His actual practical goals are eventually stripped away from him in the pursuit of empty success, and he becomes a perfect example of how well-meaning people in a bad system can do bad things, incredibly bad things. It's deeply chilling, and bear in mind that this is all happening in one of the funniest TV shows ever written.
Administration is eternal.
Forever and ever.
Amen.
It's an interesting cultural artifact, brilliantly written by Anthony Jay and Johnny Lynn. Fantastic cast. It's a really interesting look at the trajectory of modern Britain. Was it too pessimistic about the inexorable rise of the nanny state and the total erosion of people's rights? Well, given that the British people voted for Brexit but didn't really get it, they elected a conservative government recently but didn't get any conservative policies, and are currently being jailed for liking the wrong Twitter memes and possibly this video, I'd say, yes, Minister was right on the money. The BBC does not make shows like this anymore because they are too busy hounding people for their TV license money.
The reason that I've called is your property's not showing any evidence of having a valid TV licence.
Have you got any proof that we've got a TV in this house?
There's no letter or there's no writing on the wall to say that I shouldn't knock on your door.
Right, okay.
However, I will respect your right.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you.
Now, there was another copy of Yes, Minister that was made in Ukraine. It is called The Servant of the People, and it is starring somebody that you might recognize. Zelensky plays a Mr. Smith everyman who is elected president, kind of by accident, and it did such a good job at poking fun at the huge amount of corruption that is baked into the Ukrainian political system that audiences actually elected the actor to be the real president. And, unlike other copies, it's extremely funny.
Это слуги народа. Здрасте. Здравствуйте, господин президент. Яков, повар. Здравствуйте. Светлана, дегустатор. Да. Борислав, он дворецкий. Здравствуйте. Вот, это Силантий, конюх. Конюх. Тихон IV, егерь. Почему четвертый? Потому что не все президенты метко стреляют.
However, this show, despite being very well made, failed in another way. It defined corruption extremely narrowly as something that only happens when Ukrainians get money from Russian oligarchs. And by that definition, I guess, Zelensky has completely succeeded in solving Ukraine's corruption problem, even though his own massive bureaucracy still takes money from other oligarchs.
Ну, хочу сказать, если хотите дать нашей команде взятки, пожалуйста, мы готовы. Як то кажуть в Украине, ласкаво просимо. Проблем в Украине много, поэтому деньги ваши понадобятся. До свидания, спасибо.
Visual media is powerful, especially sometimes fictional media, at framing the situation and communicating some of these ideas. Anyway, all of this to say, I recommend that you watch at least a few episodes of Yes, Minister for multiple reasons. Number one, it's very good television writing, fantastic casting, acting is tremendous. Number two, I think it's a very good calibrating program, even though it lacks the cynicism that might be appropriate for talking about government. The fact that it puts the best possible face on bureaucratic nonsense and electoral vanity and the pursuit of power as a slippery slope makes it helpful. The fact that the bureaucrats are so likable and the fact that the situations are amplified for comedic effect makes this point that I'm making in the show more clearly. Most of the events that happened actually happened in real British politics. And the techniques that are used by those nice middle management bureaucrats to house train elected officials are real techniques. And the desire of the political mechanism to preserve itself and grow its power and its authority is obvious even through that 1980s laugh track.
Are you suggesting that I give confidential information to the press?
Certainly not, Arnold. This is confidential disinformation.
That's different.
And this is something that needs really serious consideration by all of us. We're about to see, after an upcoming election, either elected officials working with the bureaucracy to grow the system some more here in the States, or we will see some elected officials do their best to fight with that bureaucracy. And who knows how that will go. This is something that is actually much scarier than the assassins and the rogue agencies. Because, after all, Matt Damon can easily just solve that assassin problem for us, maybe Mark Wahlberg. But to take on a system that is as big and complicated and corrupting as the one that we have built over the last couple of centuries is going to take almost everybody. So thanks for watching that video. I hope that that is interesting to you. If British television really isn't your thing, the makers of this show also made what I would say is probably the best courtroom drama ever, and it's set in the American South, basically just right out there, called My Cousin Vinny. And if you'd like more political information, you probably know that we have a podcast, T-Rex Talk. We talk about politics all the time. In this last episode, we interviewed our local representative to talk about the importance of local politics. And then we also have a political newsletter that you can sign up for on the site. And in addition to the political newsletter, we have our regular newsletter, which is particularly valuable to know about right now because the Black Friday sales start early for people who are on the newsletter subscription. So, in the same way that we can't talk about real events very directly on YouTube, we also can't link to our website on YouTube, but you can probably find it on your own.